It's been a while since I've done a focused showcase on GameCube emulation, and we've returned to this topic with the most unlikely of all devices, with the RG34XXSP, but also the entire XX lineup from Anbernic, which is powered by the all-winner H700 chipset that at this point has been found in more than a dozen devices from Anbernic. The biggest strength of the H700 chipset is that it has a ton of support from the community, including custom firmware options like Mustard OS, better known as muOS. And thanks to what it brings to the table, there have been many community members tinkering away at getting a functional build of Dolphin running on these devices with muOS. So please join me, Rob the Retro Tech Dad, as we dive into the world of muOS Pixie and GameCube emulation with Dolphin on the H700, complete with our usual setup and install process, as well as a surprisingly larger than expected games showcase. So before we begin, I want to make it clear that this video will cover the muOS Pixie setup specifically for GameCube emulation. And because this is explicitly focused to get you up and running with GameCube, this is not meant to be a tutorial for all of the other great features that muOS provides. But it will get you up and running with muOS, and for everything else, I will definitely recommend checking out videos from my friends over at Retro Handhelds or Russ with Retro Gamecore. Now, I might as well go over the expectations here with GameCube and Dolphin on a device like the RG34XXSP, since it probably won't be much of a surprise when I say that this is truly for those that really enjoy pushing hardware and enjoy the technical aspects, and if you know me, this is definitely something I love doing, and I'm certainly no stranger to seeing how GameCube runs on random things like I did with the Raspberry Pi 5 last year. Any opportunity to talk about GameCube games is always a welcome one. Again, you should absolutely not buy any of the XX devices from Anbernic with the expectation of playing full-speed GameCube. This is an experiment for science, if you will. Now, while there will be games featured here that run decently, it's important to also be realistic about what the all-winner H700 chipset that's in the XX lineup of Anbernic devices can realistically handle. And just the fact that this is even happening is truly a miracle. But it wouldn't have been possible without the contributions of many wonderful community members over at the muOS Discord, including Sleepy, Speedrun, Fire Battle, and many others whose work has made this all possible, and also as easy as possible with much already configured and ready to go. They deserve a huge thanks for their efforts. So if you are crazy enough to take this on, I've combined the files needed into one zip file to make it easier for everyone, and this will be linked down in my description area. Of course, I will have links to the muOS community post, muOS website, and a Discord link if you want to dive deeper. Anyways, for this, I recommend going with as high quality of a micro SD card as you can use, and I'll be using a 64GB PNY card that I had here, which has worked out very well. We will be using a special build of muOS Pixie that allows us to run GameCube emulation with Dolphin. And so while much of the install process is the same as found on the muOS website, the build we are using is not the one that is available directly on there. And again, this image file will be included in the zip file from my description. Now, I've tested this with my 34XXSP, which is one of the ideal devices for this since it does have two analog sticks. But this will work on all of the XX devices except for the RG28XX, which has an issue with this screen rotation. Finally, I will be using a Windows PC for this, but these instructions should be pretty similar for those on Linux and Mac OS as well. So after downloading the zip file, go ahead and extract the contents to an easy to access location. Now I'm gonna just place these on my desktop to keep things nice and simple for myself. You should have a few files here, but the main one we need right now is the muOS RG34XXSP unofficial 2502.0 Pixie image file that we will be flashing to our microSD card. For this, you can use several different flash tools like Win32 Disk Imager, which I've tested and it actually works great with, but really any of the ones that the muOS team recommends will work. For this video, I will be using the Raspberry Pi Imager tool, which is the one that is considered the most user-friendly with the best success. And since I'm trying to make this as easy as possible for everyone, this is the one we will be using. You can download the Raspberry Pi Imager tool straight from the Raspberry Pi website, and once you've downloaded and installed it, we can then proceed to flash the muOS image. And this is actually a good time to connect your micro SD card to your computer. Okay, so go ahead and open up the Raspberry Pi imager tool and you should have a screen that looks like this with the Raspberry Pi logo on display. We will go ahead and select a Raspberry Pi device, and in this case we're actually going to select no filtering since obviously we are not using a Raspberry Pi. For the next option, we will select the operating system to flash, and when you click on this option, we actually have a couple of choices, but we will scroll all the way down to the bottom and then select the Use Custom option, which will allow us to load up the muOS image that was extracted from the zip file. So select the muOS RG34XXSP image file like I've done here, and with that we have our OS loaded up. Now finally, we need to select our storage device, and this will be the micro SD card that you're going to use for this project. So take a moment here, double check that you are in fact selecting the correct storage device. For example, I have an external storage device that is in this list, but I definitely don't want to flash to that. Instead, I will choose a device listed as a generic mass storage USB device, which is my 64GB micro SD card. We're now ready to hit next and continue on to the next step. And you will get a pop-up window that prompts to apply OS customization settings, and you're going to select no for this step. And yet again, we get another pop-up window, and for this we will select yes so that we can continue to flash the image and erase any data on the storage device. So let it do its thing, and this process will take a few minutes. So just grab a snack, and with that snack you might as well load up a Retro Game Core video and then check back in a little bit. When the process is completed, you will get a prompt that says the write was successful and you can safely remove the SD card from your PC. So let's go ahead and do that and then place the micro SD card into our device. For this, I am using the 34XXSP, and we will place the micro SD card into the TF1 slot, which is on the left side of the handheld, and then begin the initial setup process of muOS, including setting the time zone and date. Once you've done that, just let muOS do its thing, which will take a few minutes, and you know what that means, more snacks. Once done, the device will automatically reboot, and then you should launch into muOS for the first time. But we're not quite ready to mess around here, and so let's go ahead and shut down the device and then remove the micro SD card and place it back into your PC so that we can continue on with the next steps. You should now see your micro SD card listed in your computer as muOS ROMs, and so now we will spend some time adding the important files that we need to get Gamecube up and running on here. So head on over to the micro SD card and you should now have a few folders and files populated here. The first thing you're going to want to do is head into the archive folder, and here we will copy over the Dolphin for muOS version 9 file that we've already extracted as part of the zip archive, and this will allow us to add Dolphin to muOS. We're also going to go ahead and copy over that muOS version 1.1 update file so that we can update this build of muOS. And while we have our micro SD card connected ready, we might as well head on over to the ROMs folder and then populate it with Gamecube games. And this will most likely be empty if you've been following along, but go ahead and then create a folder inside of the ROMs folder simply called GC, which is short for Gamecube. And then inside the GC folder, go ahead and copy over all the games that you'd like to try out. The games in this showcase should give you a good idea of what to expect, and I will also include a link directly to the compatibility sheet if you'd like to take a look at that for another idea of what to expect with this. Again, it's pretty amazing that this is even happening and all, and so keep your expectations in check. Now you will notice that I am using Gamecube games with the RVZ file extension, and I definitely recommend using that format for your Gamecube games, as not only does it save on storage space, but it is also compatible here with this Dolphin build for muOS. Another thing that you might have noticed is that I will be using PAL ROMs for every game that has a PAL version. And there are a few that don't, and so we don't have much of a choice there. But again, we are trying to squeeze as much as possible out of the H700, and the PAL ROMs will save us a few frames to achieve better performance. So let's go ahead and copy over some games, and then once you've done that, our micro SD card is now prepped and ready to go. Let's safely eject the micro SD card and then place it back into our device. Okay, back on the 34XXSP, let's head on over to the apps section and then head into the archive manager, and you will see that we have two files that we added. And first, let's go ahead and update this muOS to version 1.1. This will take a few minutes, so again, grab a snack, maybe hug your pet, and then come back to your device and it should be ready to go. Okay, so now we are ready to add Dolphin. So like before, head on over into the apps section and then into Archive Manager and then select the Dolphin from muOS version 9 file and then let it do its thing, which actually doesn't take too long. And there you have it, we're done. So now we are ready for some GameCube and Dolphin gaming, and since we already added GameCube games, we can actually just head into the contents section, and you will see that we do in fact have Nintendo GameCube listed here, and then when you go into the GameCube folder, you should have all of your GameCube games listed here. The cool thing about how Dolphin has been set up here is that this is all configured and ready to go with different performance profiles, and this is why the work that the community has done over at the muOS Discord is just amazing, because they've done all of the heavy lifting here. And basically all that needs to be done is just launch a game. Now if you scroll over to any of your games, you can bring up an option screen by pressing the select button. So let's use Pikmin as an example, and you can see we have a new window that pops up when we press select. This is pretty useful since we can change the specific core to use for GameCube as well as the system governor. Now in general, every game I'm showing here is using the speed hack core. So if we go to assign core and then scroll all the way down to Nintendo GameCube, you will see that we have 3 different options. One is a specific core to fix games that experience a black screen, then we have a default core, and finally the one that I personally use for every game in this showcase, which is the speed hack core and the one I recommend in general. Now the cool thing is you can assign this per game by pressing A, which is the individual setting, or setting it for the entire directory so that every game in your GameCube directory uses the speed hack core to save time. So let's go back to the options screen and take a look at the system governor, and here we have many different options, and again in general I like to use the performance governor, which is what I am using for every game in this showcase, and that's all there is to it. The controls are already configured out of the box for devices with or without analog sticks. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, I think a dual stick device is the best way to go, like the RG34XXSP that I have here. And that does it. And so I think we are ready for our games showcase, and this is going to be a mix of games that perform well, but also games that definitely push the capabilities of the H700, which I think is a good demonstration of just how far we can go. And I think it will serve as a good reference point as we continue to see this sub $50-ish segment continue to grow and improve, and it serves as a good baseline for where we were at this moment with the H700, and so whatever successor comes our way, we can measure potential improvements, especially for something as insane as GameCube emulation on these much cheaper devices. So let's get this showcase started with Aggressive Inline, and as its name might suggest, it is an aggressive inline skating game that came out way back in 2002 during the height of the Tony Hawk Pro Skater era, and definitely was overshadowed by the Powerhouse franchise. Aggressive Inline was developed by Z-Axis, the same studio that worked on Dave Mirra's Freestyle BMX. So they were already pretty familiar with the extreme sports genre, and the team wanted to use Aggressive Inline as a way to innovate beyond what the Tony Hawk franchise was doing at the time. And the game really was ahead of its time with the inclusion of no time limits and levels that were essentially open playgrounds. The game featured a progression system that was tied to how often you use specific tricks. So if you kept grinding, for example, your grind stat leveled up. Seriously, Aggressive Inline should not be overlooked, and it's well worth taking a trip back to 2002, complete with a time-appropriate soundtrack. Now, I couldn't believe that this game runs at all with the H700, and I was kind of surprised at the performance here, and I legitimately sat down and ended up playing this longer than I should have, instead of continuing my work for this video. And let's get a bit weird with what is probably one of the most bizarre games on the GameCube with Cubivore, which actually began development on Nintendo's 64DD before making the leap over to the GameCube. And so it probably makes sense that it's fairly playable from a technical perspective with the H700 chipset. In this game, you play as a cube-shaped creature called, you guessed it, a Cubivore, and basically your goal is to eat other creatures in order to mutate and become stronger. It's basically a survival of the fittest where you're trying to reach the top of the food chain. This game not only focuses on becoming the strongest, but also finding a mate so that you can then create generations of offspring that carry the mutations, eventually allowing you to be powerful enough to take on the killer Cubivore. It's a pretty weird game that has a pretty satisfying gameplay loop, and much like Aggressive Inline, I found myself playing this a bit longer than I expected. It's a good thing there's lots of ways to emulate this game since it's a very pricey game on the secondhand market, going for as much as several $100s for a used copy nowadays. Konami's made several attempts to bring Frogger into the 3D platforming era over the years, and one of those attempts resulted in Frogger Ancient Shadow, which is the sequel to Frogger's Adventures The Rescue, and a surprisingly decent game that blends puzzle platforming with action elements and of course a healthy dash of nostalgia. This game was developed by Hudson Soft and features well-designed levels that alternate between old-school top-down sections and modern 3D action. This is one of the best performing games, and probably not surprising, but cool to see nonetheless that it's possible to get any GameCube game running as well as this one does. I've never actually played this one before, and the saying of don't judge a book by its cover definitely holds true here, since I had surprisingly a lot of fun with it, and ended up just relaxing in my backyard, taking in the monsoon rain and getting into the game more than I expected to, so definitely don't dismiss it. It's nothing groundbreaking, but a cool update on the Frogger formula. And we've got Capcom's hidden gem, Gotcha Force, which combines collectible figurines and chaotic arena battles into a Saturday morning cartoon style, and the result is pure chaos. The gameplay is fast-paced, consisting of 1v1 or team-based arena battles, and the game has become a cult classic over the years with a very loyal fanbase, and like Cubivore, physical copies of the game fetch for quite a bit of money online. Like many hidden gems or games with cult status, Gotcha Force was not popular at all when it launched, and it went ignored for a bit until GameCube fans finally came around to it. This is another one of those games that surprises with its performance running a lot better than expected, and I will say that this game takes a bit longer than some of the others to initially launch, but once you get going, the gameplay is surprisingly smooth. Pac-Man World 2 builds on the success of the first Pac-Man World, bringing smoother controls, better level variety, and a more refined platforming experience. I've always been a fan of the Pac-Man World series, and there's just something relaxing about the games, and Pac-Man seems like a natural fit for a mascot platformer. There's a lot to enjoy here with Pac-Man World 2 that features varied gameplay, tons of levels to explore, and there's even cool unlockables for older Pac-Man games in the Pac Village arcade. This one is on the lower end in terms of performance with the H700, and there are times that the gameplay is solid, and then there are times that the frame rate dips to be a little bit slower than I'd personally like to see, but I still thought it was worth including here, as it's fairly playable and I was able to put in meaningful time with the game, but I never felt that the frame rate was bad enough to the point that it was detrimental. It is just kinda neat to see Pac-Man World 2 running here on the 34XXSP, and again an incredible example of how far we can push the hardware with just the right amount of tweaking. The game does have very slow cutscenes, but they can be skipped for the most part, so it's a non-issue. We've got one more Pac-Man game to feature here, and this one takes Pac-Man into yet another genre, and it's a kart racing game featuring Pac-Man and other characters from the franchise like Ms. Pac-Man, as well as some Namco properties like Mr. Driller. The premise is pretty much like other kart racers from the mid-2000s, and World Rally features surprisingly tight controls as well as a solid boost mechanics and power sliding. Interestingly, the GameCube version of this game was only released in North America, which means we are limited to the NTSC version of this game, and combined with it being one of the more graphically demanding games, which definitely shows, as there are a good amount of performance issues with this one. Now, I debated on whether or not to include this, but I thought it was just right at the edge, and it's very obvious that this is where the poor H700 taps out, or I guess maybe this entire video is. The menus are slow, and the start of a race when the track is zoomed out results in very poor frame rate. In a race, it does get a bit better, but again, we can clearly see that this is the limit of what we can realistically do here. And it is a shame that there is no PAL version of this game available, just for that small boost in frame rate that would help a lot here. Anyways, there is a PlayStation portable version of this game available, and it's probably the way to go when it comes to Pac-Man World Rally. PC Genjin, or better known as Bonks, or even PC or BC Kid to most Westerners, received a relatively unknown remake for the GameCube and PlayStation 2 as part of the Hudson Soft Selections Volume 3, and it was a Japan-only release, which probably ties into being a relatively unknown release. And one of my favorite parts of doing showcases like this is being able to showcase some of the more unusual releases available. PC Genjin is actually a pretty solid remake as well, and it's a shame that it was never released outside of Japan, and since this is a Japanese release, this is in the NTSC format, and surprisingly this game can hold 60 frames per second for a decent part of the gameplay. There are some weird slowdowns that last for a short period of time, but overall this is another one that runs a lot better than expected, and it's kind of wild to see anything even hit 60 frames per second on the humble H700 chipset. Now, if you've been doing GameCube emulation for as long as I have, you might know that Pikmin is generally one of the lighter and then meatier experiences that you can emulate with GameCube, and so its inclusion here maybe isn't as much of a surprise. Now, Pikmin is one of my personal favorite games that I actually just replayed through completely thanks to its inclusion recently as part of the Retro Handhelds Discord Game of the Month, which I definitely recommend heading on over to their Discord and taking part in, which is a lot of fun and lets you earn points for some cool free swag. Pikmin also happens to be one of my go-to games for testing GameCube emulation on devices that typically don't have as much power, and so naturally I had to test it here with the H700, which is kind of unfortunately a mixed bag. Now at first glance, Pikmin appears to be almost at full speed, but as you play the game and continue on to the next area, you will start to see that the H700 begins to tap out, and it's just a little too much for the poor RG34XXSP here, and while this isn't the result I hoped for, this is still mind-boggling to me because when I was a much younger lad, and no, not a dad, back in my college days when I would bring my entire Gamecube with me to hook up to the classroom projectors and play some Pikmin on it. At that time, I definitely didn't think I could play a game like Pikmin on a device as small and as cheap as the RG34XXSP, and while we are not quite there, it's still fun to see nonetheless. Puyo Puyo Fever makes our list as the standard puzzle entry for this showcase, but Puyo Puyo is always a good time, and this one has some interesting backstory since it served as a reboot of the Puyo Puyo franchise after Compile, the series' original developer, went bankrupt. Sega acquired the full rights to Puyo Puyo in 2001, and Fever was the result of that. We get the classic Puyo Puyo formula here, but with the addition of a new Fever mode that changes things up for the gameplay. This game had a weird release, and it was available in certain regions for some platforms. The GameCube version did get a worldwide release, and interestingly uses the Renderware engine, which is the same one that was used for the Burnout franchise. And so the Puyos are actually rendered in 3D, which makes this game more demanding than one might think, and so the framerate is kind of a mixed bag, with it at times being full speed, but then starting to tank as we get more Puyos on screen. Now there are multiple versions of Fever available, including a DS, PSP, Game Boy Advance, and even a Dreamcast port. So all of those versions will be worth checking out with the H700 Handhelds instead of this GameCube one, so not a huge loss here. Rampage Total Destruction brings back Rampage with the simple formula: pick a monster and then destroy everything. But this time the roster is huge, there's over 30 monsters to unlock, and of course the cities are fully 3D and destructible. The gameplay loop is pure chaos, and for me, personally, it's a good one to pick up and play when maybe you need to destroy some stuff and get your stress out for the day. You'll climb buildings, tear them apart floor by floor, and deal with endless tanks, choppers, and environmental hazards, and the physics system is surprisingly robust for the time. It's interesting to look back on this one, and it was maybe judged a bit too harsh. Sure, it doesn't reinvent much, but it's fun, and despite the mixed reviews, the game went on to perform fairly well sales-wise. This is the last time that we would see Rampage on a home console, which means that it's been almost 20 years. Now, despite all the chaos on screen, Rampage is a pretty solid performer here with the H700, and I think for a lot of Rampage fans, it's going to be a pleasant surprise that it's playable at all with something like the RG34XXSP. The cutscenes are the only real standout issue, but they can be skipped easily. Rayman 3 Hoodlum Havoc is the third major installment in the Rayman series and continues the 3D style platforming from the prior game, but with improvements that make this one feel a bit more refined. Hoodlum Havoc leans more into the action, introducing power-ups, more enemy types, and a combat combo system that rewards chaining hits quickly. The game, like nearly every other Rayman game, is dripping with personality. From hilarious narration to bizarre enemy designs, Rayman 3 doesn't take itself too seriously, but it still nails the fundamentals of responsive platforming, puzzle design, and world variety. Now, much like other entries for this showcase, this one performs a lot better than it probably should, and while the video cutscenes are completely in slow motion, they can be skipped. In-game performance is pretty solid overall, with some dips here and there, but this one turns out to be very playable, and it's a gorgeous looking game to really show off how far that H700 can be pushed. When it comes to first-person shooters on the Nintendo GameCube, well, there's obviously not going to be a whole lot of options here, but one option that is pretty fun is Serious Sam Next Encounter, which is a spin-off game in the Serious Sam series and released only for the GameCube and PlayStation 2 with no PC release, which was certainly unusual given the series' background. Interestingly, the game engine used for Next Encounter was specifically designed for the GameCube in mind. Next Encounter is definitely not short on the waves of enemies thrown at you, complete with power-ups and lots of explosions. Much like other entries in the series, the gameplay is just old-school shooting fun, and is the perfect summer type of game, kinda like your action movie blockbuster. And I think it won't be much of a surprise at this point that I am impressed that this one runs at all, and manages to hold on to its frame rate despite the amount of enemies and action on screen. I will note that there were some really harsh frame rate dips, but it does seem to smooth out a bit, and like many of the other games here, this definitely performed better than expected. I'm so excited for this next entry, since as a shmup fan, I absolutely love talking about WarioWorld. But Rob, Wario World isn't a shmup, and you would be right about that, but it does come to us from Treasure, the same team behind games like Ikaruga and Gunstar Heroes, and the result is just awesome. Now imagine if Wario took over a 3D Mario game, but instead of focusing on the plain old boring platforming, it adds pure chaos, lots of treasure, and body slams. That's Wario World in a nutshell, with every level filled with enemies to pummel, secrets to uncover, and treasure to hoard. And the game may be short, clocking at around 5 hours, but every minute is full of Wario's loud and punchy character that is just packed with flavor. Now, unfortunately, and probably not unexpected, this game is a mixed bag, and the first thing you will notice is that it does take a moment to load up. The next issue we have is that the menus and text are all messed up, and so when you try to start the game, not only is it very slow at the file select screen, but it's a bit tricky to navigate. Now, I used a walkthrough on YouTube to help me navigate this, which made it a bit easier, and basically when you hit start, you're going to want to go over to the left to start a new game file, and then press up to choose start, and that will get you in game at least. I will say that the cutscenes are rough as well, but they are skippable thankfully. This is truly a game for the determined and patient, and while it's a bit painful to get it going, this one is surprisingly pretty decent, especially once you get into an actual level away from the main area, with some stutters here and there, and again you will not have any text on the on-screen messages. And it's probably not much of a surprise that we followed Wario World with another Wario-themed game with WarioWare Inc. Mega Party Games, and this is usually a safe bet when it comes to underpowered devices since it's not the most graphically intensive game, considering this GameCube version is based on the original Game Boy Advance release, but has been expanded with updated visuals. This is the perfect type of game to have on a handheld device, considering the whole entire gameplay loop revolves around rapid-fire microgames that last 3 to 5 seconds each, and it will test your reflexes, pattern recognition, and just general absurdity that is expected with a Wario game. The game will definitely put a smile on your face, and sometimes that's good enough. Now, similar to Wario World, the cutscenes are very slow and broken, but thankfully they can be skipped without any issue, and once you're in-game, the performance is excellent, and unsurprisingly one of the best running games here. X-Men Legends 2 is the next game in our showcase, and it comes to us from Raven Software. And around this time frame, we actually got a few games from Raven Software that were basically action RPGs, similar to dungeon crawlers like Diablo, but instead with Marvel characters, and the combination was awesome. This sequel improves on every part of the original X-Men Legends with more characters, better graphics, 4-player co-op, and a darker storyline, featuring a temporary alliance between the X-Men and the Brotherhood, which means that yes, you can have Magneto and Wolverine on the same team. The gameplay is presented in an isometric style just like Diablo or Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance for example, which is another fantastic game from the same era. Sadly, you've probably noticed that the frame rate is probably the worst that I've shown in this entire showcase, and this was more of a selfish inclusion, since I wanted to rep X-Men Legends, which is an awesome set of games. But yeah, I don't think many are going to be realistically playing this on the XX lineup of handhelds. And we've reached our last game for this showcase, and my favorite entry, since I knew that this game was even worth looking at thanks to my best friend Zoo over at Retro Handhelds, who showed off X-Men 2 Wolverine's Revenge running on his RG35XX. Now, I'm not suggesting you tune in to Zoo Reviews every Wednesday. Instead, I'm telling you that you have to. And I've created an Outlook calendar entry in case you need a reminder that it's Wednesday, which is available down in my description. Also, while you're there, you should definitely check out his video about muOS Pixie, and learn more about all the cool things that it features in case you're wondering. And when it comes to X-Men 2 Wolverine's Revenge, this is another one of those games that seems like it should have no business running here, but it does, and it actually runs a lot better than expected. This is a decent enough movie tie-in game, and really, who doesn't love kicking butt as Wolverine? And so that does it for this video, and I think this was a fun topic to explore, and I always love testing the limits and seeing what's possible with underpowered hardware that is cheap, readily available, and is available with many devices in the retro handheld space. There are some games here that are definitely playable, while others will probably be better off somewhere else. But nonetheless, it's a cool proof of concept, and for those that enjoy tinkering like I do, it's something fun to mess around with over a weekend. Let me know down in the comments section if you plan on messing around with this on your XX device, or if you've already done so. Well, until the next video, as always, I am the Retro Tech Dad, and thank you so much for watching.